Hello, everybody. Some years ago, I was lucky enough to do a residency in Barcelona in the very beautiful studios that the Australia Council for the Arts owns there with my fabulous partner, who does actually happen to be a real writer as opposed to me. And we were in Barcelona for 3 months. And over that time, I met a great young painter there named Peter, who took me to some really inspirational places, talked to me about Picasso crossing the Pyrenees with his best mate, who then, his best mate shot himself in front of them in a cafe in Paris. These dramatic and incredible stories about the history of art and about where I fitted into it. And I got to know Peter quite well. He took me to another incredible atelier in Barcelona where Picasso had actually drawn, and the files of these drawings, the cupboards were still there. Quite incredible place. And it was only after knowing him for a few weeks that I said, how do you fit in? He said, my mum's an artist. And I said, who would I know her? And he said, she's Betty Churcher. And I nearly fell off the chair. So almost 10 years later, to be approached by the Sydney Writers' Festival and to be asked to be involved in the festival, I said, you must have another Ben Quilty. I'm clearly not a writer. And they said, that's all right, you're just interviewing someone. I said, that should be all right. Who? And they said, Betty Churcher. And I almost fell off my chair again. So clearly Betty needs no more introduction to you than she did to me. I'm very, very honoured to be here today with Betty Churcher.
Thanks, Ben.
The other thing I mentioned is apparently up until yesterday, Betty Churcher thought she was interviewing me. So she's actually sort of quite sneakishly gone through the entire place and put images of my work up behind me. I had no say in that, all to Betty, and goes to something that I'm sure some of you will know about Betty, that incredible generosity. So I thought we'd start today, Betty, with the beginning of you as a little girl. I found out that you went to the same school as one of our friends, Margaret Olley, and you actually loved your schooling. Margaret didn't like it, but I assume she was a bit of a brat.
I didn't know Margaret at school, to be honest. No, she was ahead of me.
Yes. Well, she that fabulous painting in the book, and for those of you who have had the opportunity to have this book, Evicted was the first painting that I thought I'd talk about. And I have the most beautiful image, having read your description in this book, of you being a little child and forcing your dad to drive back time and time again to the Art Gallery of Queensland to view that work. Can you tell us about Evicted and what it meant for you? Because it is one of those sentimental works that I guess I grew up in New South Wales, in the Art Gallery of New South Wales, looking at George Lambert for the very same reason.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. Yes, Evicted has followed me through life a little bit like a bad smell. You know, when I was going to do this book, I had a drink with my brother, who's still in Brisbane. He said, well, you've got to include Evicted. I said, oh, you're not again. I've spoken about Evicted, you know, it's been printed everywhere. He said, you've got to do it, you know, because that was the beginning. He could remember me trying to get Dad to go. And Dad kept saying, no, we've been to the art gallery, we've been there, we don't have to go there again. And his view was, you only go to an art gallery once. And I wondered since whether my desire... to finish the story, I said to him on this occasion, I said, but Dad, it's different this time because there's an exhibition of war art on. That's how I know when would have been about 7. And
already telling them the way it was?
Eh?
Already pushing your weight around as a 7-year-old?
Yes, or trying.
Yeah.
I said, there's an exhibition of war art. It was a total lie. There wasn't. and when we got to the gallery, one of those impossible things that a child has to deal with and can't, there was an exhibition of war art on. But they'd taken down Evicted to make room for it. And I sometimes wonder whether my desire, when I was the director of the National Gallery, to bring major exhibitions was any way associated with that memory of Dad, who says, no, you don't go to an art gallery twice. And then I said, there's an event on. Oh, well, then we'll go. And, you know, I just wondered, was it a connection? Maybe not.
I guess it, for me, and I've felt for many years, I've wondered whether the contemporary art, particularly the big museums, often try and over-theorise things, and I know that there was a big movement for it, and the postmodern movement definitely brought through this huge swathe of theory. And for a painting like Evicted, there's almost a Dickensian sort of incredible theatre of a painting like that. That I guess at some point there we lost here, that the fact that a blockbuster painting like that does touch more than just the people in the arts, that it touches the whole community. And you took that as a little 7-year-old and ended up becoming the director of the most important museum in this country, and became known as Betty Blockbuster, yes. which I thought, I remember the first time I heard that, thinking, why not? I mean, that's what it's all about. It's about getting an audience in. Yeah. And for paintings like those, what you think as a little 7-year-old, you already had that intuitive...
Well, I wonder, you know, because I can remember thinking, when we were driving in the car, I was packing it because he was a bad-tempered man. I thought, how am I going to cope with this when we get there and there's no exhibition of war art on? And I remember thinking, why would he go to see an exhibition of war art when the gallery's got so many wonderful things to see anyway? You know, and so I can remember thinking that.
Yes.
But the interesting thing was, I said to Ian when we had this drink before I started the drawings, no, I'm not going to do it. And I was pushing my wheelchair past Evicted, and I just caught it out of the corner of my eye, and I said, I'll go and have a look. So I pushed up to the... And in the wheelchair, my eye level was about the same as my eye level when I was 7, and I suddenly realised what it was. It wasn't really the story. It wasn't that sort of rather touching, melodramatic, Victorian sort of sob story that's being told in the picture. It was the magic of paint, that paint could turn a blank piece of canvas magically into autumn leaves that you could almost hear crunching under those feet, you know, of the mother and little girl.
It should be up on the big screen, but someone else had another say in that.
But that's what it was. And it was revelationary for me. In the book, I've done a drawing of what I could see in the wheelchair, which is just the feet and the autumn leaves on the ground.
And it goes back, I guess, for me, to your dad and this image that I had of your dad as a little person, who your dad as well was quite against you going on to finish school, thought that you had a place as a woman that you would have to fulfil. God, you proved him wrong. But you had a real place, a real fondness for your dad. One of the questions that I had the honour of asking Margaret Olley towards the end of her life was, what did you think of the feminist movement when it came along? And she said to me, I don't know why they hadn't thought of it years before. and having read quite a bit of what you've written, I got a real sense that you were so far beyond those ideas of gender and equality. You were just the person you were. And I can't help but think that that's set in stone as a child. Even though your dad had this thing against education, he did set you on that path.
Yeah, I don't know what he did actually say to me when I said, I don't want to leave school now. That was after what we call junior in Queensland, which is grade 10. I want to go on to matriculation. I didn't want to go to university, but as it happened, I couldn't have gone to the Royal College of Art, I couldn't have gone to the Courtauld Institute if I hadn't had matriculation. And he said to me this mysterious thing. He said, no. He said, education spoils a girl. And I was thinking, goodness, how on earth does it spoil a girl? And what he meant was it give you aspirations and thoughts beyond being a wife and a mother. Well, it didn't. I was a good mother.
And one of the great sadnesses I always felt for Margaret was that she openly felt that she had to give up the opportunity of being a mother, and now being married to a mother and being a father, you realise what a profound thing and incredibly lucky thing that is to be involved with. But you pulled off all of the above. You've ticked every single box. I mean, and I can list your CV, and for those of you, I can't list it now, we don't have enough time, but the profound changes that you've made to this country's acceptance of arts, and to have children, and to be with Roy still now, who's very ill, I wish Margaret had followed in your footsteps.
No, Ben, what box it doesn't tick is I didn't become an artist. And I think that is the thing. You look at the women artists. Now, I know a lot of them have family and have done very successfully and are successful artists, but a lot of them are not. And like Grace Cossington-Smith, Margaret Preston, Margaret Olley, they Jean Bellette, no children. They married, but they didn't have children. And that's what I found when I was starting a family. I knew I was putting at risk my future as an artist, but I was already doubting my ability. There's something that Ben's got. If you don't have it, you won't make it. You can be a very brilliant student, and I ran lots of prizes. That's like an express train that gets you to the bottom of the mountain. But the mountain you've got to climb on your own, and I wouldn't have made it, Ben.
Right.
To be honest,
well, I mean, for those of you who don't have this book, you should get a copy and make up your own minds. But she just quietly, don't tell anyone, she draws a hell of a lot better than I do.
Maybe, but I don't make things like that, which is...
Yesterday, I actually saw John Olsen, one of your dear old friends, and I had a glass of wine with him, and I really wanted to ask him what questions he would ask you. And before I'd even explained as to why I needed to know, he said, she's an artist in her own right. Before I'd even finished my sentence about having the opportunity to talk to you today, he also said, it just came out of him, he said, she's caring and courageous, instantly as well, caring and courageous. And I thought, you don't often get such an immediate response from someone like John Olsen.
That's lovely.
He also said that then he stopped and said, and he had a glass of white wine, he said, we've known each other so long, I don't know why it never went further than just friendship. And I said, it may have something to do with Betty's husband, but I'm not sure. And he then said to me, we were on the board of the National Gallery of Australia together. And I said, really? When was that? And he said, about 1825. So those friendships with those people, and for me, a real link to people like Drysdale, who also only had the sight with
only
one
eye. Yes.
Did you know the Drysdale?
I didn't know Taz, no. Right. Margaret knew Taz very well, very close friends.
And John really pushed into me the question that I wanted to ask about being an artist, that I have a belief that the practice of art comes through practice, which is a misused term, I feel, that practice is like football practice or yoga practice, and that if you put in the hours, you'll find how to climb the mountain. But you in a way, your self-deprecation that you were years ahead of any other positions of such power, was the director of the National Gallery of Australia. So personally, I'm happy that you didn't become an artist, because all these other things wouldn't have happened. Like true, being the art critic for The Australian, as a very young woman, in a time in Australia when I know that my grandmother felt that she was second in command of our family to my grandfather. In fact, my dad was brought into the world feeling that. So you've lived through that generation. Tell us about being the director of the National Gallery of Australia and dealing with boards that are often very male-heavy.
Very male-heavy.
And the Art Gallery of Western Australia.
Oh,
Tell us about one of the directors there and how you left the Western Australia.
Yeah, well, I fell into the position of the director of the Art Gallery, the National Gallery, almost by accident, because something had happened. I hadn't applied for the job. I knew James Mollison was leaving, but I hadn't applied. I was the director of the Art Gallery of Western Australia. Having a really tough time with the chairman of the board. He was a brilliant man, but oh God, he was difficult to work with. And something must have happened with the process of application, because applications had closed, interviews were over, and I get a phone call. I'm in the Art Gallery of Western Australia from the Department of the Arts in Canberra. Would I consider the job in Canberra? And I said, no. I said, I've only been here for 3 years. And I started suggesting people. I said, have you thought of Patrick McCackey? Have you? I'm suggesting people. Then about, 10 days or 2 weeks later, Robert Holmes of Court did something else. I don't know what it was, but I remember sitting in bed thinking, oh, God, can I cope with this? And I thought, well, maybe you don't have to. So I picked up the phone and I rang up Canberra. I said, is that job still going? And they said, yes. Then the funny last touch was, it was during the pilot strike, so this is in 1889.
1980.
1989.
Same century she met John Olsen.
Same century, that's right. The pilot strike was on. They were going to bring me across from Perth in a Hercules. I said, oh, look, don't worry, no, I won't do that. And then they found me a commercial airline. So I really got there by default, I have to say, not effort.
What do you think makes a good museum director? They're sort of often not seen unless there's a celebrity attached to them, but they're so fundamental from my perspective.
Well, I had a difficult row to hoe at the National Gallery because coming after James, who'd been there for something like 23 years, he'd put every rule in place, he'd purchased every painting, he'd appointed every member of staff, and so everything that I did was seen to be in opposition to James, and it wasn't. But it took some time. Actually, it took until the first major exhibition, and they all thought, oh, she means it.
What was that?
It was Rubens and the Italian Renaissance.
Oh, yeah, just a small
Just
show.
a small show. What I wanted to do, we'd had big exhibitions, but they'd always come as a package put together by someone else. What I wanted to do was to create an exhibition with our own curatorial expertise. So we get a painting from here and a couple of paintings from there and a painting from here, and build the exhibition together. So it never came as a package to us. And I just wanted to show that Australian had that ability. The curators at the National Gallery had the strength and the ability to do it, and they did it, and it was a marvellous success. And I think it made the other curators think that, she means business.
Because at the same time, there was a real drive, I think, and a cultural cringe about Australians not being up to running institutions like that.
Yes, and not being able to get an exhibition together of their own, having to get from the Courtauld collection, or the Phillips collection, so they just come, someone's got it all together, and it arrives in packages. But it was quite something. I remember going around Europe and America with Gough Whitlam was then the chairman of the board, and David Jaffe, who was then a curator at the National Gallery, Australia, became senior curator at the National Gallery at London. So Gough and David Jaffe and I went around Europe making these incredible requests. And I think people were so gobsmacked by our cheek or something, they all said yes. We got the most marvellous collection together.
The job at the National Gallery of Australia is actually open for tenders now, and I thought I'd sneakishly get you back and put you up for the job.
Real
Regards.
me.
Who do you think will get the new directorship?
Oh, I couldn't even.
I thought we were going to get the inside knowledge then.
Couldn't even think. And I'm being accused now of subverting the chances of someone who applied when I retired. Now, this is something like 17 years ago, and about a fortnight ago, I get this threatening letter of someone who said that I'd subverted his chances. I don't do that, I'm not...
I'm sure you've got a thick enough skin for those morons. Don't repeat that I said that. I thought I'd go back to the book, and another one of those paintings that planted in my psyche as a little boy at the Art Gallery of New South Wales. And by the way, my dad thought that one visit to the Art Gallery was enough as well.
He was the same.
But now he's my greatest fan, and I love him dearly. And Mum's here, so don't tell Dad that I said that, Mum. But In fact, I apologise if none of your family could get here. This is all my family in front of us.
Oh, what a wonderful
They've come
family.
from all over the place, and I was mistakenly thinking they were coming to hear me. Tom Roberts has bailed up at the Art Gallery of New South Wales. Was one of those paintings as a little boy that first of all, I guess I was taken by the subject matter, by what that was, that was my history, that was European history inside this country. Tell us about, particularly about going to the site of where that work was made.
Yes, I went to the site where this was made, bailed up.
Which should be up there again.
Except that lovely painting that is up there. And then I went looking for the first painting that he made, which was called On a Corner of the McIntyre, because he wanted to paint a picture about Thunderbolt. That was Thunderbolt. The New England tableland was Thunderbolt's territory, if you like. And the corner of the McIntyre is in the National Gallery, and this bailed up is in New South Wales. And one of the things that, in doing this, researching the painting properly, going to the place, the corner of the McIntyre is still almost exactly, you can almost see where Tom Roberts would have put his easel. You know, this granite escarpment is exactly as it was in I've got to get my century right, in 1895. But this other painting, he didn't do the corner of the McIntyre because Thunderbolt is just crouched behind a boulder and you don't see any of the troopers, they're just sort of gunfire. And he must have decided that there wasn't enough human interest. So he did this one, the bailed up.
Sorry.
Which many of you will know. Now, the interesting thing about that, Roberts was no good painting away from the subject. He always had to have the thing in for him, very visual artist. And that slope continues down on the other side of the road. The road is just exactly like that still, just a dirt road. But the slope continues down. So what Roberts did, he got the men on the station where he was staying at Newstead North to build a painting platform in these gum trees. I'm trying to think what they are, the ones that stringy bark.
Saplings, yeah.
Stringy bark trees. And it was a big, proper platform, 12 feet square, with a railing around three sides, a ladder leading up to it so he could get the right elevation looking down. And he painted the landscape. And it's the most marvellous evocation of an Australian landscape. Dry, brittle, sparse, prickly. He's absolutely got it. He didn't have the coach there on the road. The coach was painted in Inverell, which was the closest town to Newstead North where he was staying. And he took a room in the Oxford Hotel for 3 months while he painted that coach and horses, because he was meticulous about getting the detail right. He knew that all of the chaps, you know, and the shearers and the station hands, they'd all point out any errors in the harnessing of the horse or in the horses themselves or the carriage. So he was very careful to get it right. But you can see it's a different time of day because the sun is almost directly overhead with the coaching scene. And on the hill, the shadows are running up the hill like it's an afternoon.
Which is an amazing thing. I've been looking at this painting almost all of my life, and I'd never noticed that.
No.
Until I found it in this book and thought, it's so obvious.
Yes, a lot. But do you know what?
But I think that's one of the things about Betty, that she looks through, it's like you sort of dispel the myth of genius loci and all those sorts of ideas of the greatness of something, and you just seem to see through it. And that comes from drawing. But one more question I wanted to ask you about this. Was the platform still in the trees?
No, it used to be until quite recently. Mm. And somebody, I think some vandals pulled it down.
Imagine that cubby house of incredible, unbelievable piece of
little ladder
of bush.
getting up to
unbelievable.
it.
In the when did it? Do you know when it disappeared from the side of the track there?
Well, I spoke to someone because I wanted to find out precisely where it was that he painted. He showed me the group of trees where it had been. No, he said a few years ago, and that was in about a few years ago now, so it's about 4 or 5 years, the platform did remain. But you know, that painting, majestic as it is, stayed in Tom Roberts' studio for 30 years. And if young artists get frustrated about their work not immediately sort of selling and immediately getting into collections, they should realise they're in pretty good company. You know, Tom Roberts, imagine 30 years. And he tinkered with it a bit, and he sold it eventually in about 1927, I think it was, or 28. So he's dated it. What are the dates? 1895.
95 to 27.
To 1927. I think he didn't want the person who was buying to think he was getting old stock.
I do that too. Yeah, look, it's something about drawing too, and I guess I had my own cringe about this work as I went to art school and was meant to be thinking about Warhol and postmodernity and
you're looking
fairly
at that.
boring parts of not boring, I shouldn't say that, things that haven't really driven me to look more at art. One of the other things I always have noticed about those paintings, that he had a family sit for him who must have been just locals, but they look like they're bored in the middle of the day, being blasted by sun, while Tom sat up in a cubby house.
That's right.
Possibly with a cool glass of lemonade and a paintbrush.
They were all people from the Newstead North where he was staying. He stayed there for ages. And they think that Thunderbolt, who's seen standing talking to the woman in the coach, that was Duncan Anderson, who owned this sheep property. And it was Duncan Anderson's shearing shed that appears not in Shearing the Rams, but in the Golden Fleece. Shearing Newstead North, I think it's called.
Tell us more about drawing. And you've
Why
lost
do
the
I
sight
draw?
in one eye. It's like you're making an imprint. And I mean, obsessive drawing. Your practice is, and really they are exquisite drawings. You are a really special, you have a special ability to capture something, to draw hands, to draw all the things that us artists associate with the most difficult part of any practice.
But I can't do it without other artists, you see, that it is very different, you know, what happens. And an interesting thing is I cannot draw from a reproduction. I can only draw if I'm standing in front of the picture and get totally immersed in it and lost in it, and I hardly know what I'm doing. You know, I'm just sort of... I remember in the London National Gallery I was drawing in the Manet, that wonderful one of the waitress at a bar, and the pencil was just happening. I wasn't doing it at all. It was just going because I was right on that woman's face. And I'd just finished, and David Jaffe, who used to be a curator at the National Gallery, now a curator at the National Gallery London, came down. I thought, oh, thank God you didn't come down a moment ago, because if he'd broken it, I may not have got back. Well, you know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
Because you just sort of lose yourself in it. But I can't do what Ben can do.
It's not about me.
Right?
Sorry, keep going.
No, well, what Ben does, of course, when you see him painting, you know he's in the grip. And he's in the grip of something which is mysterious and majestic. And I'm so in awe of whatever that is. And I don't know what it is. Emmeline Warrior is too. I've watched her paint. And she puts her brush down on the canvas, and you see she's just not there. She's down under the ground where the roots of the yam are growing. And it's somehow, you do the same thing. You know, you're just right in there. And I'd love to be able to do it.
But I really do believe that comes from practice.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. It does. It comes from practice, but also you've got to have an innate instinct and what is it? It is an instinct almost.
I don't know about that. Seems like pretty hard work to me every day I go to the studio. And I don't know about majestic either, but anyhow. So on that note, I guess, do you think that art schools should be getting kids in front of paintings like that? For a while there, it was a very, possibly driven by you, that it was an important thing to do. And you were the Dean of RMIT Art School
I
as well,
was.
to add to that list.
No, when I was at the Dean of the RMIT, it wasn't RMIT then, it was Pitt Phillip Institute in Melbourne. That was in the 1980s, and this was definitely not to be done, you know, drawing from things like Tom Roberts, oof, no. And I don't know that it would benefit a student terribly. You know, I think I do it personally to slow me down, you know, because I think we don't look long and hard enough at work and let a work come to us and inhabit us in the way, unless I've got a pencil in my hand, the work doesn't come forward and really inhabit me and take me over in the way it does when I'm drawing from a painting. And anything to slow us down in this hasty age in which we live, I think is a good thing. I can't think of, you know, I see my grandchildren, their little thumbs going, like, the images flashing and everything changing. And one of the great things about a work of art is that it's immutable. It's sometimes, like if it's a Rembrandt, it's been in the world for 400 years, and it's likely to be in the world for another 400 years. And that's wonderful thing of its relevance stretching, like William Shakespeare's plays. Their relevance stretch across centuries, and it's only in art, I think, that you, am I right? I was going to say it's only in art that you get this ability for relevance to last. Because I think with Rembrandt, he touches on an aspect of human beings that was true then and is true now and will be true forever. I think you do a bit, actually.
Back to me again.
Back to you. I really thought I was interviewing, but still.
You have been. So, and I guess back to your drawing and losing your sight. I mean, for me personally, that's one of the fears for me, that I would lose my sight.
Yeah.
But you I mean, you say you need to be in front of the image. Do you think you have a photographic memory once you've made that drawing?
Once I've made the drawing, it's imprinted on my, like, I can close my eyes, the one eye that works, and I can see anything that I've drawn, almost stroke for stroke. I think it was John Olsen that said to me, he said, well, you get into the engine room, Betty, meaning, you know, you get into where the thing was generated, where it was made, you know, and the finished product is the work of art. But, you know, with my drawing, I can get in. The other nice thing he said, which I loved, he said, you shine a torch into dark corners.
As he does, you mean?
No, he said
saying,
that of me,
oh,
of my drawings. He said, you shine a torch into dark corners, meaning I point out aspects of a painting that he hadn't seen, you know, like you said about the shadows in the Roberts.
How did you first meet John Olsen?
I first met John Olsen when Roy and I came back from England.
Roy was there.
Eh?
Roy was even
Oh,
there.
Oh, yes. 1957, we came back. Roy went down to Sydney in 1960, and John had just painted his marvellous Spanish Encounter, which in 1960 was an absolute mammoth thing for Australia. It was huge.
Where did you see that painting first?
I saw it first. It was purchased by the New South Wales Gallery very early, and I think I saw it I can't really remember. But I thought of then, it took my breath away, and it still takes my breath away. And I said to John, it's in this book, and I did try to draw it. I said to John, I just couldn't draw it. He said, no, nor could I.
One of the, in the introduction, I'll just read to you the last paragraph from the introduction. And finally, I thank my patient husband, who every time he has looked for me has found me crouched over my computer. He won't have the same frustration again. This is my last work. I mean, to add to the list of achievements, author is right up there. But as well as that, there's a real sense that I get from people that you are, and I know myself from hearing you speak, that you're one of the few elders that talks about the reality of being human, that death is a part of that. And you're approaching it with an incredible ease, and I think that's what John Olsen meant by courageous. How do you feel as an 83-year-old?
Well, I get a bit impatient with people who say, oh, no, you're not, as if death doesn't exist. Of course death exists. And if we old folk don't shuffle on, there's going to be no resources left in the country for the young people that are coming on, and I just feel, move over, get out of the way.
I texted my aunt Jane, who's in the audience somewhere, what...
Oh, how old is she?
She's my aunt.
Oh. Not a great aunt.
She asked her what would she like me to ask you, and she just texted back. She was a fabulous school teacher, and my godmother, who never believed in God. I don't know what Mum and Dad were thinking, but she said she is just effing brilliant, and I've never heard her swear before.
Oh.
But there is this real sense in the community that there'll be a big gap when you do die, and that you are a role model not just for young women, but for young men as well. What advice would you have for me as a young artist coming up? I mean, obviously to treat other people with respect and to give them yourself, but...
Well, the main thing is just keep doing it, for God's sake.
I'm not going to give up.
No. But... you do leave a gap, like Margaret Olley left a gap, but Margaret is still there, isn't she?
Yes.
And Margaret's personality and Margaret's feisty thing, and I think Ben got that watchful eye. Look at that eye. Margaret didn't miss a trick, No. Did you paint that from life, or...?
No, I made some etchings from life, but this isn't about me, remember?
Yeah, that's it.
At this point, I thought we might open up to the floor for 10 minutes of questions. If anyone has any questions for Betty Churcher, there's a microphone on both sides and up the top. Now's your chance, or we'll keep talking, and she'll keep trying to interrupt me. Any questions? Yes, down the front.
Oh, look, you can't totter in front of a camera at my age, no.
That's exactly what Margaret Olley said when I said I want to make a painting of you. She said, no one wants to see my old face. But I think this audience, this was the quickest sellout show of the whole Writers' Festival. So I beg to differ as well. I hope that your last sentence in your introduction is a line that you will totter in front of another television screen, for sure.
No. Someone said, which is a feasibility, I wouldn't appear, but, the book could be a good television program with a voiceover, perhaps. But I think it was Kenneth Clark when someone said to him, will you do another Civilization? He said, no. He says, you've got to realise that after a certain age, you lose the ability to project yourself out as he had when he did Civilization. And he wisely decided not to. And I really wouldn't, as I say, totter in front of a camera now at this age.
Another question?
Just wanted to ask if there was a painting that's influenced you more recently, that's had a big impact on you, and what that was and why?
Oh, Ben, this
No,
brings
don't.
me... I'm sorry. Well... Well, yes.
Thanks for the question. We'll move on. Any more questions?
Now, let me say why Ben's paintings move me, say, like the ones he did in Afghanistan, those soldiers.
I give up.
Well, it was a question that I'm answering it. And as I was looking at that was on television, I just could absolutely, emotionally and intellectually just got to it. You know, I thought I knew exactly what he was doing. I knew exactly what was motivating him. And I knew, you know, what was driving him. And after all, the War Memorial probably wasn't too happy with what you were doing.
The Australian Defence Force was less happy.
Less happy were they?
But
yeah.
it's funny, at one point, I did feel, I heard an aeroplane over my studio in the Southern Highlands. and I rang one of my friends, who happens to be Nick Mitsovich's son-in-law, the director of the Art Gallery of South Australia, has a brother-in-law who's in the Special Forces. And I rang him because I just had this ridiculous paranoia. And he said, "Don't worry, Ben, all the young men with guns are on your side." And it was a very profound feeling.
That's a lovely thing for him to have said.
Yes.
All the young chaps that have their fingers on the trigger
Well,
are on his side.
Actually, at the same point, one of those, the painting I made of him was in the Archibald that I entered the year before, Margaret, the painting of Margaret. And a very, very less than glowing review came out in a not the Australian newspaper, another newspaper, and I won't mention the reviewer's name. And that morning, I got a call from this young soldier, and he said, have you read the paper? And I said, yes, why? And he said, "Do you know that man?" I said, "No, why?" And he said, "Do you want me to get him?" So I actually had a real vested interest in going to Afghanistan. I have a very armed security force behind me. Another question? Is that microphone on?
Is it?
I'm a little hesitant to ask this question, but do you think there is a quintessential Australian art or artist in any of our eras?
It's a good question.
Yes, that is a good question. It makes me pause. There is something essentially Australian about Australian art. And this is why I think that exhibition that went to London didn't do so well, partly because of the Londoners' isolationist policy. You know, they're very snooty about anything that's not London or English, British. But it's hard to put your finger on what it is that's... there's a certain sort of directness, a certain rawness, a certain... I can't put my finger on it, but I think there is something, but it's not obvious. It's not obvious. Where I think they probably made a slight mistake with that exhibition in London was, instead of having a wall of John Olsens, they put one John Olsen in. Now, one John Olsen doesn't make a heap of sense, but, you know, put a wall of Ben Quilty, it makes a bit of sense.
I wasn't even in that show. I wish Betty had
wasn't
curated it.
Put a wall of Fairweather. I saw an exhibition that Norman Rosenthal, who's a brilliant curator, he was a curator at the Royal Academy Gallery. It was called A New Spirit in Painting, and it was in the early 1980s. And he did just that. He had a wall of Kuki, and a wall of Baltus, and a wall of Picasso, because Picasso was still alive, of course. And it was a knockout show, you know, because you got to see, you know, the power of the artist. You take a painting out of an artist's oeuvre, I hate that word, what shall I say, output. It doesn't often give you a clear idea of what the artist's about. But I haven't answered your question because I can't. I don't know, but except that in my fingertips, I feel that there is something distinctly Australian. And that's what these artists were on about, you know. They were Australia's centenary of white settlement occurred in 1888. And in the 1890s, Tom Roberts painted 5 quintessential Australian paintings. There was a great surge of patriotism. And what they were looking at was the things that made Australia different, not the things that made Australia like Europe, but things that made Australia different. So there was sharing the ram, there was a breakaway, there was the bailed up, there was Mountain Muster, which is the only one that I think bombed out a bit. And the 5th was the sharing in Newstead. But
and Margaret Preston, I've always felt, had something that borrowed from Indigenous culture to remodel European vision.
She did.
Did you know Margaret Preston?
No, I didn't. But Margaret would have had a job doing that now.
Oh, absolutely. She had a job then, didn't she?
Oh, did she?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh,
yeah.
did she?
Yeah.
She would. She had a great respect for Aboriginal art and their ability to cover its surface, you know, and she did some marvellous paintings. That one of my favourite paintings is that painting from an aeroplane flying over with the clouds, little puffs of clouds casting little pools of shadow on the landscape below. The other artist, I think, who's very interesting at the moment, I've just noticed it over there, is Fiona Hall. She's working in South Australia, but she did those marvellous sardine cans. You know,
and the next representative for Australia at the Venice Biennale.
Oh, is she?
She is.
Ah. Well, those sardine cans I just adore. They're in the National Gallery in Canberra. And she's got a very serious and strong commitment to the way we human beings are using and destroying our environment in the name of progress. The forests that fall and the creatures that go extinct, you know, because the forests have fallen. And she realised that when the English explorers came back from the South Pacific, they'd found a new Eden, these islands of the South Pacific, and they were bringing back to England these marvellous samples of tropical fruits and trees that no one had ever seen before. But it didn't take us long, did it? But these are all about those exotic tropical things that were brought back. But she has a lovely sense of humour, because when she was looking at other florilegiums and encyclopedia of natural history, she noticed that a lot of the scientists classified plants by their means of reproduction. So she thought she'd classify us by our means of reproduction. And inside the can, you've got the banana, or they say the grass tree with its pollinating spike up there. And if you look inside the can, there's an erect penis.
The human pollinating spike.
They're both very clear about what their role is
Yes.
in the natural world.
Yes. Back to you touched on then Indigenous culture, and Margaret Preston now would be difficult. How do you feel about that? Because I do feel that, and often it's a very tricky place to work through, but something that I'm very driven to make work about.
It is hard, isn't it? That's why I've got no Aboriginal art in this book, but I had to put Emily in Warrior because I think she's just such an extraordinary painter. But I'd prepared a television program. I spent 2 years on it. And I wanted to, on Aboriginal art, and I wanted to show that there are some Aboriginal artists where you can look at them in exactly the same way as you look at any artist, you know, early work, later work, middle generation work, old age work. The whole stretch of their creative endeavour. And I worked on this, and I had the plug pulled at the last minute, and I have never felt so distraught by anything ever before, you know, because it was 2 years of very intensive work with me travelling into the centre of Australia, enlisting the help of someone in Kings Canyon there near Ayers Rock in the centre there. And I was told no. The Aboriginal community had just said no, they don't want a European commenting. And I said, but I'm not telling us about our painting. I said, I'm not telling you about your painting. I'm telling the people who are buying your work about your painting. You know, but it didn't work. I had to just close that chapter in my life. It was the first and only time I've ever sat on my bed and howled. I really did. It was a wail of a bank shit. It wasn't tears. It was just pure frustration.
There was one other time, very infamous story about Ron Radford pulling you out of a museum when you were in tears.
That was when I first realised. He was very sweet, actually. I realised that it was a Bonnart exhibition, and I really wanted to see it, and I realised that this eye, which is the only working eye, just wasn't up to it. I've since had those injections, so it's a lot better now. And just tears just burst into my eyes, and Ron, just noticing, just quickly whipped me round the back to another away. We were in a VIP group being taken around. And so only Ron saw that. How do you know?
I have my sources.
Aha.
Yeah, very moving story. And
Yeah.
I think it's powerful that you're happy to talk about it. Sorry I put you on the spot. Is there another question or two? Yes.
I could ask a follow-up question about how the world sees Australian art. And you touched on it a little bit there. Do you think the world thinks of Australian art now primarily in terms of Aboriginal art? Is that the most famous internationally of our various art?
It's hard to say. I think Aboriginal art is probably the only truly innovative thing that we've been able to offer, because all our other artists come out of a European or Western tradition. But in that exhibition, the London exhibition, I have to say, they made disparaging marks about Aboriginal art, you know, these dots and dabs and things. I think Emily and Warriors shut them up. I think that wonderful Big Yam Dreaming, you know, that's in the National Gallery of Victoria, I don't think anyone dared comment adversely about that. But it's difficult to know. You see, how much do we know about South African art or South American art? Mm. You know, when you think about it, it's very much we know. And I think that was a mistake. I was determined not to go into this, but I think they made a mistake with that exhibition in London by trying to show too much, you know, especially colonial, because it's of consuming interest to us, say David Lycett and some of those early convict artists, but it's not interesting to Londoners. Glover even isn't, because, you know, they have got Turner, you know. They should have gone for the things like Tom Roberts was going for, things that were quintessentially Australian and that couldn't have happened anywhere else. But I don't know to what extent Londoners think about Australian art. I think people like Emans Tillers, I think you've probably got an international. You certainly will after you've been in Saatchi, yes.
Back to Betty. Back to you.
Yes. Well, I'm just trying to answer the question. It's a hard question to answer.
It's very difficult question.
And a few artists do have a reputation.
I think if you're an artist and you're worrying about it, then you're making for the wrong reason anyway.
Making a mistake, yes.
I think we just have to focus on making.
Yeah.
back, you touched on something in that answer about criticism and about the very negative reviews and some of the most
They were
cutting
horrible.
reviews I've read. But there is that sort of tension in contemporary art in Australia now with some of the reviewers from the big papers that never, and it's funny, one of them said to me it's much easier to write negative criticism. And I think the same goes for literature. Theatre's a little bit different, I think, but definitely in visual arts there's a really, like a bent towards very negative criticism. How do you sense that?
I don't know. I don't get to see newspapers anymore. I live in the middle of a sheep paddock now and they don't deliver the paper. But I'll tell you, I hated being a critic. I really hated it because as soon as you walk into a gallery, the gallery owner descends on you knowing that you're writing for The Australian. And the only thing I wanted to be is left alone, just to look at the work on my own. And so immediately you're being sort of bombarded with all this information and enthusiasm from the gallery owner. And that's why I got out of it. I thought, no.
Were you asked to review things or did you go looking for things?
No,
to
I was
review?
just reviewing anything that was happening in Queensland. I was like the Queensland critic for the Australian newspaper. But I only did it for a couple of years for that reason.
Yes.
It just robbed me of the joy of going to galleries.
Yes. You get to look at a lot of art though, except with a pesky dealer.
Well, you don't actually... See, I've got to be on my own. I'm the cat that walked by itself. I must be on my own to really experience something properly.
Well, that about ties up our time. There was one more question which was about whether you had any regrets. But I would just mention to everyone that this amazing, beautiful publication, which I feel may not be the very last thing that Betty Churcher puts her hand to.
Yes, it is.
It is not. I don't believe it. You can have Betty sign the book today in the Ruth Cracknell room on the first floor, and that could be your greatest regret, that you agreed to sign so many of my family's books. So everyone, it is a great, great honour, not only to be involved in the Sydney Writers' Festival as a sneaking in as an artist, but to have the opportunity to sit here with you today, Betty, is an incredible honour, and I'm sure we would all like to say thank you.
Thank you.